at Press TV. The UN calls for the trial of those behind the recent U.S. killing of Afghan women and children. South American states back Argentina's sovereignty over the UK-occupied Malvinas Islands. And oil remains above $126 per barrel following Iran's response to the EU oil sanctions. Hello and welcome. Live from Tehran, this is Press TV's World News. Thanks so much for being with us. Well, UN Chief Ban Ki-moon has called for the punishment of those involved in the recent killings of 18 Afghan civilians. In a statement, Ban said that he expects that an investigation into the killings will rapidly establish facts. He also urged all authorities and military personnel to pay extreme and utmost care to protect civilians. Earlier, U.S. President Barack Obama announced that Washington will probe into the murders.
For that reason, I've directed the Pentagon to make sure that we spare no effort in conducting a full investigation. And we will make sure that anybody who was involved is held fully accountable with the full force of the law.
Earlier on Sunday, a number of U.S. soldiers went on a door-to-door killing spree in several villages in the southern Kandahar province. The victims include 9 children and 3 women. The bloodshed has fueled anti-American sentiment in the war-torn country. Fresh anti-U.S. demonstrations have been held with protesters calling for the immediate trial of the perpetrators of the murders. Well, author and Afghanistan expert Mohammad Dawood Meraki says that the U.S.'s announcement of an investigation into the recent massacre by American troops is not serious. He says the lives of Afghans have no value in the eyes of the U.S.-led forces.
It's a political move. For the past several years, we have tried in vain to convince the U.S. administration and various agencies of this country that they have to take care when they do conduct operations in Afghanistan and not to, carry out the type of raids that cost the lives of people day in, day out. But they simply ignored it. And the question is this: how much investigation, how much efforts has been, directed to those efforts? It coincides with the U.S. elections and also with the public opinion trend in the United States that people oppose the war, and hence the president needs to put a very unique, a very positive spin on it, in that the U.S. is, eager to conduct the investigation appropriately to the point that the person should be punished, so forth and so on. But we need to look at the past 10 years. Unfortunately, nothing of this sort occurred. The NATO and the U.S. forces went to this village and offered $1,500 for the life of each of these victims. You see, in Afghanistan, you can buy a cow. A good cow costs you about $1,300. So the life of an Afghan is about the value of a cow in Afghanistan in the eyes of the United States Armed Forces. And a few years back in Uruzgan province, they murdered a lot of people in night raids. And as subsequent to the murders, they offered and gave actually $90 per life that they have wasted. Now, the United States wants to make sure that the $500 billion that they have invested in the murder of the Afghan people, and they call it democracy, that this project doesn't go down the drain. But this is a little too late. If they are really serious about this, they should forget about this. They should not forget about this one incident. They should definitely investigate it, but also they should put it into the war.
Well, former U.S. Vice President Al Gore says it's time for an Occupy democracy movement to fix America's political system. Gore says that action is needed to mend what he called a no longer functional U.S. government. He says American democracy has been hacked and dominated by corporate interests. The former vice president adds that the influence of money in politics has grown to the point that money has become a proxy for a vote. Gore was speaking at a gathering of technology experts, entrepreneurs, and journalists in the city of Austin, Texas. Well, remaining in the U.S., now Occupy D.C. demonstrators have gathered outside the White House to show their outrage at President Barack Obama's signing of a controversial anti-protest law. H.R. 347 outlaws many forms of protest and has been dubbed the end of dissent law.
347 specifically states that if you have the intent, willful intent, to be in an area protesting while Secret Service are present, then you're subject to being arrested. And this is in direct contradiction of the First Amendment, we believe.
The Federal Restricted Buildings and Grounds Improvement Act of 2011 was originally passed in 1971 and has since been amended a couple of times. Well, civil liberties groups say that the law violates the right to assemble, which is a crucial part of the democratic process.
347.
Well, more American citizens have fallen victim to the excessive use of force by U.S. police. At least 3 unarmed African-American citizens have been shot by American police since early February. Now, the incidents cast further doubts on U.S. claims about human rights. Here's more.
Pallbearers carrying the coffin of an American teenager shot to death by the U.S. police in the Harlem neighborhood of New York City. Ramerly Graham was hit in February inside his father's home. Police first claimed he was armed, but later it turned out that Graham was unarmed when he was killed.
Nothing. And I can't get no answers as why this happened. Why does that happen to him? Why?
Ramerly is not the only victim of recent police brutality. In California, police have killed a decorated Marine in front of his children. Police say Sergeant Manuel Loggins Jr. was a threat to his children, but friends and colleagues of the former soldier have described him as anything but violent. Another young man was severely wounded in Oakland. 24-year-old Tony Jones was shot in the back by police as he tried to run away from them. He was also unarmed. Again in February, footage emerged of an unarmed, handcuffed girl being tased by Florida police. 20-year-old Danielle Maudsley is still in a coma. The officer who tasered her has been cleared of any wrongdoing. The U.S. issues annual reports about human rights violations in other countries. Such reports usually target those nations whom the U.S. government considers as adversary. Amnesty International has slammed Washington over the matter, condemning it for, quote, criticizing other countries' behavior while failing to uphold proper standards itself.
Well, fresh revelations about the U.S. foreign exchange program. Reports say that dozens of high school students from abroad have been sexually abused by their American host parents. In an exclusive report by NBC News, it has been revealed that at least 4 exchange students were sexually abused over the course of 2 years by the same host father, Dole Mayer.
He would ask me to lay on his chest when he was watching TV, like coming next to him and just come and lay on my chest, trying to get away. And I turned around and he started to do it also on my chest and started to going down and down. It is my host father.
He touched places that he shouldn't have touched. I was very afraid that he would send me home because my parents would be very disappointed.
The organization that placed him with Mayer, Educational Resource Development, has been accused of orchestrating a cover-up to protect its reputation. The organization kicked out one of the exchange students from the program instead of excluding the host father. Now, the program, overseen by the U.S. State Department, brings over 25,000 teens from around the world to America.
Swept under the rug, concealed. Absolutely every parent's nightmare.
Well, South American countries have once again backed Argentina's sovereignty over the Malvinas Islands.
Evidently, I have restated the firm support of Brazil, and not only Brazil, but of the entire region towards Argentina's claim of its sovereignty over the Malvinas Islands.
Meanwhile, Argentina's foreign minister says he plans to discuss measures against the UK in the upcoming meeting of the South Atlantic Peace and Cooperation Zone. Hector Timerman says that London has violated a key anti-nuclear treaty by deploying nuclear-armed submarines to the Malvinas. In 1982, London and Buenos Aires fought a brief war over the territory, which is also known as the Falklands. Buenos Aires claims sovereignty over the islands which lie east of Argentina's coast. Well, earlier we talked to Gretchen Small from the Executive Intelligence Review about the significance of the Latin American support for Argentina's sovereignty over the islands, and this is what she had to say.
The president of Argentina's State of the Union speech on March 1st, when she opened the parliament, the legislative assembly there, she not only reiterated the support for the Malvinas, I mean their stance on the Malvinas that they do not want war, but the Malvinas are theirs, and pointed out that the British have more soldiers there than there are inhabitants. The city of London and the British Empire is completely bankrupt. And that's really where the Latin Americans who are standing firm with Argentina, just as you said, which is very important, this is where they can, I think, deal the strongest blow to the British.
Well, Brent crude for April delivery has climbed above $126 a barrel, hitting an 11-month high. Now, this comes in the wake of Iran's decision to cut oil exports to some European states in response to the EU's sanctions on the country.
Oil prices have remained high following Iran's decision to cut crude exports to some European countries in response to the EU's sanctions on the country. The United States and its allies have pinned their hopes on Saudi Arabia to boost its crude output to fill the supply gap. Washington is now pressing Riyadh to boost its oil production. But there are rising concerns in the West about the Saudi monarchy's capability to do so, as it faces a popular uprising in its oil-rich eastern province. Despite a deadly regime crackdown, anti-regime protests are held on a regular basis in the US-backed monarchy, where public dissent is rarely tolerated. Analysts cast doubt on the West's hopes that other oil-producing countries can replace Iranian crude exports.
Few people think that the other potential global suppliers could or would fully replace the outflow that might be cut off from Iran.
And even if Saudi Arabia manages to boost its crude output, the kind of oil it produces is not the type that major refineries in the West are capable of processing. European refineries are particularly optimized for processing the type of crude Iran exports. The recent jump in oil prices has also brought the average price of a gallon of gasoline in the U.S. to over $3.80. U.S. President Barack Obama's job approval rating has already plunged to below 50% due to the soaring gas prices. Obama has said there is no silver bullet to ease the pain at the pump. There are rising fears among Americans that soaring gas prices are hitting America's already slow recovery from its recession. Many in the U.S. now ask why the American people should pay for Western politicians' adventurism.
Well, live from Tehran, this is Press TV's World News, and these are the headlines this hour. The UN calls for the trial of those behind the recent U.S. killing of Afghan women and children. South American states back Argentina's sovereignty over the UK-occupied Malvinas Islands. And oil remains above $126 per barrel following Iran's response to EU oil sanctions. Well, stay with us later in the bulletin. We'll be taking a look at the effect of Western sanctions on Iran's aviation industry and civilian lives. Stay with us for that and a whole lot more.
In 1948, 750,000 Palestinians were driven from their homes and their land by Zionist terror and are denied the right of return.
That right of return is a right, it's not a game.
There is no state of Israel, there is an Israeli occupation.
This is the land which we own.
This can only be the key to the house.
We will return back inshallah soon.
Here's my keys. In Haifa.
In this series, we seek to find out what happened to the diaspora.
Well, thanks for staying with us right here, Press TV. It is 5:46 in the morning here in our international studios in Tehran. You're watching the second half of this World Bulletin. To the news now. The Press TV correspondent and a cameraman abducted by a Libyan militia have called on their captors to immediately release them. In a video message, Press TV's reporter Nick Jones and his cameraman Gareth Montgomery Johnson say that they were looking forward to being freed and seeing their families. Now, the two were abducted along with their local guides on February the 22nd by the Swaley Brigade. They were first accused of illegal entry. Now, the militia later announced that the two were being held on suspicion of espionage. A spokesperson for the group says that they have now been transferred to the Libyan National Transitional Council. However, the NTC has not yet confirmed that the two are in their custody. Well, the joint UN Arab League envoy to Syria, Kofi Annan, has held talks with top Turkish officials and Syrian opposition leaders in Ankara. Annan stressed that the unrest in Syria should come to an end by finding a political solution. Press TV's Mehdi Golizadeh reports caution. The following report contains flash photography.
The United Nations and the Arab League envoy to Syria, Kofi Annan, has held talks with top Turkish officials and Syrian opposition leaders in Ankara as part of his efforts to accomplish his mission to end the unrest in Syria. Annan stressed that he will try to bring the Syrian administration and the opposition at the table to find a political solution to the Syrian crisis. Former UN Secretary General, in his meeting with Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Foreign Minister Ahmet Davutoğlu, briefed them about the latest developments he had witnessed since the start of his mission. The Syrian figures that held talks with Annan were headed by the leader of Syrian National Council, Borhan Galyon. Annan termed the negotiations as constructive.
We had constructive discussions as to my approach and how the future development of the process would be. And they have also promised their full cooperation, which will be necessary if we are going to succeed.
The Syrian opposition leader said there are a number of countries ready to arm the Syrian opposition forces, but stressed that the Syrian opposition's main goal is to find a political solution to the problem in Syria. This comes as the Syrian opposition has so far rejected talks with the Syrian administration.
Kofi Annan is trying to bring the Syrian administration and the opposition together for talks, but the opposition does not consider the move as positive. Such efforts are unlikely to bear fruit, as the Syrian administration and the opposition cannot trust each other.
Annan also said he has presented a set of complete proposals to the Syrian administration and is waiting for the response from Damascus.
Observers believe that the result of Annan's negotiations in Ankara will be a key factor in shaping the outcome of his tough mission to find a solution to the unrest in Syria.
Turkey has been at the forefront of multinational efforts to force Syrian President Bashar al-Assad to step down. Turkey plans to host the next meeting of the so-called Friends of Syria group in Istanbul next month. Now it remains to be seen how Turkey's stance towards Syria could impact the prospects for a political solution to end the unrest in Syria. Mehdi Golizadeh, Press TV, Ankara.
At the UN, China has joined Russia in opposing a third push by Western states to pass a Security Council resolution calling on the Syrian president to step down. Back in Beijing, the Chinese Foreign Ministry has been defending its stance. Press TV's Stephen Ribe has the story.
In Beijing, the Chinese government stood firm in its rejection of Western demands for an end to the government of President Bashar al-Assad in Syria. Speaking to reporters at a regular press briefing, Foreign Ministry spokesman Liu Weiming said the ministry reaffirmed its six-point statement on how to solve the Syrian crisis, made originally a week earlier. The statement demanded that the country's sovereignty be respected and that outside powers abide by the purposes and principles of the UN Charter.
On the Syrian question, the position of China has not changed. It is the six-point plan that was put forward in detail by Ambassador Li Baodong at the UN Security Council. We hope the situation in Syria can quickly stabilize so that political dialogue can resume. We also hope that international community can play a positive and constructive role in achieving this aim.
Liu was speaking the day after representatives of Britain and the US sharply criticized Russia and China in a debate at the United Nations Security Council in New York. During the debate, the Western powers were making a third push for a resolution calling on President al-Assad to step down as a way of resolving his country's crisis.
As permanent members of the UN Security Council, both China and Russia have twice vetoed Security Council resolutions condemning the Syrian government.
As before, China's UN ambassador Li Baoding said his country was opposed to an outside push for regime change made under the guise of humanitarian intervention, in a clear reference to the Libyan resolution China allowed to pass in 2011.
People ask why we agreed with the resolution on Libya. It was because China and Russia never thought that the Western powers would use humanitarian purposes by twisting it to a war that led to the death and suffering of countless civilians. Any resolution we agree to now must leave no room that gives the Western powers an excuse for military intervention.
Once again, Li called for a ceasefire followed by inclusive political dialogue as the best way to resolve the Syrian crisis. This contrasted with the line taken by a spokesman of the Syrian Free Army opposition movement, who, speaking from Turkey on the same day, predicted a Gaddafi-like end for al-Assad. Stephen Ribe, Press TV, Beijing.
Well, the Qatar-based news network Al Jazeera is being accused of bias by its own staff. Now, many Al Jazeera employees from several of the channel's bureaus across the Middle East are quitting the network. A managing director at the channel's Lebanon bureau is the latest staff member to quit the network. Now, he says Al Jazeera totally ignored the recent referendum that was held in Syria. Former Al Jazeera employees cite bias as the key reason for their resignations. Now, they accuse the network of twisting and even fabricating stories about Syria in order to get the international community's sympathy. This is not the first time that Al Jazeera is accused of such misconduct. The network has been accused of fabricating stories on Libya and even creating its own footage. It has also been accused of being controlled by the Qatari state. Well, a strong voice is emerging at the, strong voice is emerging at the UN in Geneva. In 19th Human Rights Council meeting continues. This is Captain Houshang Shahbazi, who landed in Iran Air 727 aircraft, saying hundreds of lives after he failed to deploy the front landing gear, is speaking out against Western sanctions on Iranian airlines. Press TV's Fabienne Pierre has the story.
This is the video that captured the hearts of Iranians and the world at large. Look carefully and you'll notice that the aircraft is being guided to an astonishingly safe landing in spite of the front landing gear failing to deploy. Captain Houshang Shahbazi, who piloted that very Iran Air 727 to safety, has flown to Geneva to speak with the human rights panel on a ticking time bomb.
Unfortunately, sanctions imposed by the Western countries on civilian airlines in Iran have caused a considerable number of plane crashes and have led to the deaths of hundreds of passengers, which, according to the aviation statistics, is above the average death toll from such unfortunate accidents in the world. The sanctions have resulted in technical failures over the last decade due to the dilapidated parts in the aircraft.
Every time a plane goes up in the air, the captain says he is often only able to relax upon safe landing. But the sanction is a lot more grave than it sounds, and here's why. Imagine for a moment that you need new brake pads for your car because the ones you do have are about to fail, and every shop you go to refuses to sell them to you. Now add to that the image of the brake pads actually failing and the family in the backseat suffering the consequences. It's then you begin to understand the fear of pilots and the severity of the sanctions that blocks the sale of vital aircraft parts from Western countries to Iran. So why the Human Rights Council? The captain says it's simple. The sanction violates the UN Declaration to the right of life, of not just him, but passengers.
According to Article 2 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in the Declaration without distinction of any kind. Furthermore, no distinction shall be made on the distinction of political, jurisdictional, or international status of the country or territory to which a person belongs.
Some progress has been made, however, as talks with the Ukraine have yielded positive results, and the captain hopes the petition he has started, already garnering over 100,000 signatures, will reach the ear of US President Barack Obama, who the captain believes continues to follow the status quo. For now, anxiety grows and apprehension pervades as each day at the landing strip or even in the air, there is knowledge that a large-scale tragedy may be nearing its future fulfillment, and no captain with any amount of skill may be able to do this and live to tell the tale. Fabian Pear, Press TV, Geneva.
Still amazing to see. And with that, that brings us to the end of this World News Bulletin. Thanks so much for staying tuned to us right here at Press TV.